while we already do not have many apps that work, the answer should not be, no, don't try this because it's already been tried. Okay. That is the opposite of what you want to do in my view. I don't know who gets it right, but there's definitely something there based on how many of these apps have been so successful at getting mindshare and customers. They just haven't been able to retain them. But retention is the oldest problem in consumer. And once somebody figures that out, then I think that is ultimately SocialFi is going to be the thing that takes crypto forward.
This episode is brought to you by Access Protocol. You'll hear more about them later in the show. Before we get moving on today's episode, just a quick disclaimer. The views expressed on this podcast by either myself, my co-host, or any guests are their personal views and do not represent the views of any associated organization. Nothing in the episode should be construed or relied upon as financial, technical, tax, legal, or any other advice. Okay, let's jump into the episode. All right, everyone, welcome back to another episode of Lightspeed. It's Mert and I this week hitting you with our roundup. A lot to talk about per usual. I feel like I say that every time, and it's never a lie either. We had a maybe fake Donald Trump meme coin launch. I still don't even know if it's real or not. Subsequently, the other actual Trump meme coins tanked 50%. There's always drama. But there's a lot of interesting things going on as well. On the tech side, and I kind of want to start here. Ghost Logs launched what's called, I think it's sandwich.me, and it's showing a live feed of sandwiches that occur on Solana traders. So, Mert, I know you helped the team build this. So if you can walk, maybe I'll pull up screen here. If you can walk us through what this dashboard is showing, and then we'll get into some more questions after that.
Basically, these guys, GhostGraph.xyz, they built this. I think they're primarily a Solidity shop and EVM shop. They built a real-time sandwich monitor so you can kind of see these things happening in real time. I didn't help them build it. I did give them feedback, and same with Jito and I believe Lane. And we'll be just adding more and more stuff to this. And so basically it shows you the sandwiches on the network. And one thing that came up actually 5 or 6 times so far, there's two things. One is that Toli said, why are dApps sending these validators transactions? And then the second thing that came up was that, sometimes Helios is on here, and it's super easy to see because Helios's public key is grinded. So it does say Helios, and it's very easily noticeable. And they're kind of have the same answer. And the way it works is RPCs on Solana send transactions to the current leader and then the next N leaders. Now that N is configurable. Some people might do 3. Some others who I will not name might spam the entire network such that those transactions are propagating around everywhere and being forwarded left and right. And basically what happens there is searchers can see these transactions. And obviously, the more they propagate, the easier it is for them to catch these transactions. And once you search and you find the opportunity you're looking for in the context of a sandwich or a front run, you can then submit this to a validator with a Jito bundle. Now, the validators that are receiving these bundles don't actually know what's in them, right? Nobody checks exactly what's in these things. It's just executed from the client. And so what you'll see actually is that just about every single validator on the network, the ones who run Jito, which is just about all of them, plus some private ones, will actually be accepting these transactions. And the validators themselves don't necessarily need, and if you scroll all the way up, it'll give you an information pop up for the validator. This is why one of the problems is so difficult to dig into, which is that the validators can't really understand what's happening, or they can. But for example, assume that Helios validator added this new heuristic for not accepting certain kinds of bundles. That can then be gamed by using different kind of account structures on Solana. And so this is a problem. And the problem gets worse because people can also kind of game, Jito simulations and whatnot for the block engine. And in some of these cases, actually, you can see the sandwich is being landed with 0 Jito tip. And so the validators don't even make money from it. And so, so there's quite a few problems and inefficiencies there that need to be ironed out. What this does, though, is it helps. It's a starting point for getting visibility into what's happening. And that visibility can then be used for RPCs, for maybe reputation monitoring, or stake pools for delegating stake to certain actors based on algorithmic choices determined by these data streams. And so that's kind of and so like when Tolly says something like validators just shouldn't or dApps shouldn't send these to the validators doing them, that's not a solution because every validator does it. And so you can't just not send transactions. The only real solution is, since Helios produces a lot of blocks, we can give like an MEV protect endpoint such that the transactions in our blocks can be guaranteed to not be sandwiched or front run because we have full control over the transaction flow. And the problem with that, of course, is that it's a trade-off for latency because we do not produce blocks every second. We produce them every X minutes, right? And the more stake we have, the lower X is. But so that's maybe the crux or some sort of context on the situation. And it is a gnarly problem. One thing that I do think would help is at least some sort of help from the application layer, because there might be something totally fundamental I'm missing here, but I haven't seen many application level solutions to this at all, with the only exception of just sending directly to Jito bundles and just bidding high, right? That seems to be the only kind of okay solution for now, but obviously it's not a sustainable one. And so people from other ecosystems who are not close to the metal will say things like, oh, people are getting sandwiched, Solana doesn't care. It's like, that is not the case. We have a lot of resources, not just us, multiple teams have a lot of resources to making sure these get reduced, because ultimately DeFi cannot scale with this in place, right? And it's just a very difficult problem. Anyone who claims to have solved MEV is just suffering from a lack of users or activity on the chain.
Yeah, that's really good context there, Mert. And then maybe for someone who's unfamiliar with what a sandwiched attack is, I'll walk through one of these transactions here, just kind of show you what this looks like. So a sandwich is when a sophisticated actor, let's call them like a bot in this context, sees a victim transaction, which would be like me or you sending a trade. They see this before the trade has been executed, and they, the trades that get sandwiched most often are going to be trades that set a high slippage. And as we were scrolling through this, you'll see that a lot of these sandwich coins are all meme coins. So the prevalence of meme coins on Solana has created a lot of these opportunities for sandwich bots. And so, again, if a user sets a high slippage tolerance, that's basically saying, I'm willing to get, like, this is my worst possible price that I'm willing to get for execution. And a sandwich bot will see that and say, okay, perfect. We'll put you right at that worst possible price that you're willing to accept. And then I will profit off that spread. So what this looks like in practice here, if we look at this one on the Boop coin, the user is in the middle here, hence the name sandwich. And so they said, I want to trade 0.15 Sol for 992,000 Boop. And so the bot came in and saw that before the transaction was executed and put a front run transaction, basically moving the Boop price to the user's worst possible price that they set with their slippage tolerance, and then letting the user trade come in directly after it, and then selling the back run trade there immediately following it. And so ultimately you'll see that the sandwich bot here is able to pick up 0.002 Sol profit. And so it was a fairly effortless profit for the sandwich bot, which is, again, why these are so prevalent. And this was happening on Solana when Jito was offering its mempool service that has now been discontinued because this was happening so rampantly. and they wanted to kind of help curtail that. And we saw these like private mempools pop up, and like those were able to be fairly easily identified, it seems, by some of the engineers close to the metal. But we're still seeing this happen. And you mentioned that there's not really a mempool happening right now, but RPCs are kind of spamming the transactions on behalf of their users, because as the RPC provider, you have one prerogative, and that's to land a transaction for your user. Like that is basically what you're being paid to do. So I guess there's an incentive for the RPC to do whatever the hell it takes to get this to happen. And then the issue here is because they're broadcasting it to everybody on the network, including people that aren't leaders, they're getting leaked into these private mempools. Is that kind of right? Am I thinking about that right?
Yeah. So there are private mempools, and there are also some weird things that nobody really, I don't think, is fully understood. And then the RPCs forwarding to, many more than they need to actually makes it just makes the problem worse. So for example, we ran a few tests with Helios RPCs with stake weight QoS and high fees. Your chances of getting sandwiched is much lower than if you had used one of these other providers. And we'll release reports on this later. Now it's lower, but it's not impossible. It's still possible to get sandwiched. It just makes it more difficult. And so it is a tough problem. And part of it also stems from maybe some level of quick shenanigans on how the networking layer, there are some exploits, quote unquote exploits, or some ways it can be gamed in a sense. And so you combine all of those, and then now you have this dark forest. And there are obviously patches and fixes. For example, FireDancer's networking stack is going to be live for Frankendancer by Breakpoint. And that's a totally new system that's built from scratch.
And Breakpoint's what, September, right?
Yeah.
Okay, nice.
And I think a lot of people underestimated how fast this would happen. When Jito, and we did an episode on this, when Jito announced that they're sunsetting or suspending the mempool, I'm sure they'll bring it back at some point, everybody was super happy about it, except for basically the only people who weren't were me and John Sharp, and kind of got lucky or right by accident there, because we just thought that it would happen much sooner, and people just thought it would be super difficult. But turns out it's actually not as difficult as people think. And obviously meme coins being so prevalent, and millions of tokens being launched per week, just drastically increases the sheer volume of these attacks. And so there are some interesting things coming out, like DFlow, which they have some things in store to help with this. They add memos to the transactions, etc. And so we'll see how it goes, but that is the current state today.
Fragmentation is a huge problem for Ethereum, but also for the subscription industry. We all know the pain of tracking which subscriptions you're paying for and the hassle of trying to cancel them. Well, Access Protocol is here to help with a new way to consume content via staking. It's built on Solana and gives you an easy solution to stay up to date with what's happening in the crypto industry by giving you access to your favorite publishers like CoinGecko, CryptoSlate, and a whole list of independent creators. The ACS token, that's the Access token, is staked to gain access to all of that creator's content without the hassle of having to manage a subscription. If you want to give it a try, check out the link in the show notes to claim a free NFT that gives you access to a creator's content. All right, let's get back to the show. Staying on to the tech front here for a minute, you put out a fun tweet the other day that said some upcoming things. 2 killer consumer features, Frankendancer, ZK compression, FireDancer, Mithril, solvent rollups on Solana, or V2, runtime V2, which hopefully doubles the block capacity, brings in async program execution and multiple leaders, the second iteration of the Solana phone, and Breakpoint. That's a pretty bullish list of things there, Mert. One thing I actually don't know is the 2 killer consumer features. What were those?
Nice try. I am not able to disclose those yet. The teams there have their own GTMs and whatnot, but I was quite impressed. And I think if those can work, it can be a new way of interacting with blockchains.
Intriguing. You're left to ponder, I suppose. On the tune of consumer, though, staying with it, Time.fun, tokenizing your time. Kind of an interesting concept. Also kind of just like friend tech, but slightly different. At the end of the day, you're just paying to talk to people. I saw you were active on there. I set up an account. I gave you a little ref link bonus there because I did see it through you. What are your thoughts on Time.fun and then the idea of like social happening on Solana more broadly?
Sure. So actually, it seems that a lot of people share that sentiment of like it's maybe friend tech with a few different knobs, and that's kind of how innovation happens. There's a great book on this by Matt Ridley on how innovation works. It basically talks about the history of basically all tech and how it's all kind of a smaller iteration over something that people just didn't even know existed and just had a better go to market or execution or better timing or better luck, something along those lines, right? Like Facebook is fundamentally just MySpace, but with a few different things. Not sure why MySpace didn't work, but Facebook worked. And maybe it has something to do with Zuck and the team's prowess there, or their go-to-market was starting from university campuses. So Time.fun, I just came across it randomly, and the idea of tokenizing your time is intriguing because obviously the saying goes, time is money. And so that's an interesting, and on the side, I've always been looking for this kind of app where, what really annoys me is LinkedIn, where people just spam the shit out of you and there's like thousands of messages every day. And I even put on my bio, do not message me on here, only use Twitter. Doesn't work. Nobody reads. And so, and then same with email. They somehow find your email. I don't know how they do it. It's not on my LinkedIn. They find your email and they just keep sending you messages. And so it's like, okay, if you're going to waste my time with these random things, or if you're not wasting my time and actually have something legit, you might still get, let's say, boxed out by the people who are spamming and wasting my time, right? Or anybody's time. And so if there's a way to basically pay some sort of small fee to send messages that you think are important to people you want to send messages to, and if that price is like market determined or something, that's interesting. I don't know if it works, but it is interesting. SolLinked on Solana had something like this where you'd have to pay like 5 USDC, 20 USDC or something to send totally like a message. And he'd give you like help on startups or something. So I think it has merit. I would use that. So that's how I know I think it's a good idea because I would personally use it. And so Time.fun is maybe some version of this where you can do DMs, you can do Telegram groups, you can do one-on-one meetings, like Calendly meetings. And then this is just from day one, like they just released and they have a lot of other things coming up. And so I think the idea has merit. I've just used it myself. And what I thought interesting was it was on base, right? And so I went onto the site and I was like, here we go. But I was able to just log in with Google and I had some ETH on base laying around. So I was just able to transfer and that was it. And it was, the UX wasn't like perfect, but it was good enough. And so then I was able to just go from there. And then that got me starting to think, why are all these apps? Because actually, some of my favorite apps are just not on Solana, right? So I use Fantasy Top. I use this now. I use Farcaster. There's also FriendTech. None of these are on Solana. I mean, Farcaster is kind of on Solana with the frames integrations, but none of them are on Solana. And so I started just thinking out loud, like, why is this the case? And I talked to all these teams actually in parallel. And basically, it's something like, in the Fantasy Top founder actually tweeted it. It's something like the ecosystem of integrations and whatnot is just more fleshed out on Solidity and EVM land, which is totally fair. And basically the friction there needs to be a bit lower for people to just iterate and experiment with rapid code changes. Somewhat hard to do that with Rust. And, totally will say something like, well, you can just use token gating and SPL and stuff. And it's like, yeah, you can do that for probably like 60, 70% of things, but the last 30% of things where you need customizability are where you start running into some weird issues that slow you down. And so I was thinking, Solana has an ecosystem of consumer focused folks because generally nobody needs to worry about infrastructure that much. And then you then combine that with Solana mobile, and consumer has to be on mobile. And you then give people some ecosystem resources that are product focused, right? I mean, the founders of earn.com, for example, which is some sort of a variation of this, are on Solana, right? They're on Solana Foundation and whatnot. And I think that's actually a pretty interesting angle. And there's also a lot of people hungry for this, I would say, just because it doesn't exist on Solana. And so I think that is an interesting combination. And I think it's a win-win because the consumer apps get Solana mobile distribution and ecosystem distribution and lower fees and cheap fees and whatnot. And then Solana mobile itself gets users building on it, right? And that's also distribution. I think like a few 100,000 phones have been sold. Obviously, some of them are Cybele. But so that's my thoughts on maybe the first part.
Yeah, I agree with you. Like, I hate the sales pitch emails. I cannot stand them. It angers me. My inbox is totally ruined. My email is fairly obvious given like where I work, and I was a fairly early employee, so it's pretty easy to guess. And it's very, very annoying. So but my issue is I want to apply what they're doing here onto my existing applications. I want you to have to send me 30 cents or whatever to send me an email through Gmail. Like, as opposed to having this separate form of communication, or even Twitter, like DM me for 8 cents or something silly, like just to filter out the obnoxious spam. And I don't know, that's like at least a little more personalized. Whereas like you couldn't do this on Twitter for like, it costs 2 cents to tweet, right? No one would ever tweet anymore. But I think you could do it for more of like a gated features, like sending someone a DM, unless like, if like for example, if we don't follow each other, then it costs you 8 cents, or I'm making up numbers here. But so that I feel like I want to apply what they're doing onto existing technologies rather than vice versa, which it's hard to solve, but you're kind of going the opposite roundabout way here.
Yeah. And then that's a good point. And, I would like for LinkedIn to add that, but then the question of focus and existing network effects and all that comes into play. And so, which is the second point to your question, which is like maybe what is SocialFi in general good for? And I don't think anybody really knows. I have my own thoughts on it that I think are worth testing out. But basically, social is an almost unbreakable network effect that the Web2 giants have, right? So you're not necessarily going to. Twitter has done some weird shit and nobody cares, basically. They're still on Twitter. Facebook's for boomers, you're not going to get rid of that. Instagram, TikTok, those are super strong. And so this is one of the only things I've seen where the customer acquisition velocity is actually insane. Like you can get thousands of users onto your platform ASAP. And then the problem becomes retention. But at least you've solved at least one of the problems. And then now you need to focus on the other one. And I really hate the frame of mind which says something like this has been tried before and so it won't work, because nothing is homogenous in this. There's nothing consistent. Okay, the time is different. The markets are different. The team is different. The ecosystem is different. Everything is different every time you. So I've always hated that quote, like that Einstein thing that people quote, like insanity is expecting there's different results from doing the same thing. It's like, no, that's actually not true, Einstein. I'm sorry. You can absolutely just get one tiny different insight. It doesn't have to be anything ground changing. Just one little tiny insight could lead to some set of flywheels that you didn't even see coming. And that's kind of the beauty of being an entrepreneur, which is that you take those risks anyway because you think you know something that somebody else doesn't know. And I'm not sure who solves it, but I think that's the environment we need to promote, right? While we already do not have many apps that work, the answer should not be, no, don't try this because it's already been tried, okay? That is the opposite of what you want to do, in my view. And so I don't know who gets it right, but there's definitely something there based on how many of these apps have been so successful at getting mind share in customers. They just haven't been able to retain them. But retention is the oldest problem in consumer. And once somebody figures that out, then I think that is ultimately SocialFi is going to be the thing that takes crypto forward and gets it to be known in a different light than just finance.
It's like we're reaching infrastructure exhaustion. So I'd rather be talking about iterations on social apps than whatever the latest and greatest based pre-confirmation yada yada. So it is more interesting. There's just no doubt about it. You brought up Fantasy Top as well, and gaming is really interesting. I want to quickly talk about Magic Blocks in a second, but one thing has been like a barrier to entry for me for a lot of crypto games in general, including Fantasy Top, is like costs like a fucking couple grand to get started. And like, I don't know, that's just the inherent nature of crypto is everybody has magic internet coins, and you don't really care if you spend 1 ETH on starting things. But if you like think about the context of like buying a video game for 1 grand or 3 grand, I guess it's much different. So I don't know. I'm curious how you think about like the history of crypto games / social having these like really high startup costs.
So I'm not an expert on gaming. I don't have any particularly strong opinions except for the fact that I don't think anybody knows exactly the architecture that would suit any one game, because every single one game might have different needs, and those needs ultimately dictate what infrastructure you use. Now, if for some reason it requires everything to be on chain, I'm not sure why, but it could. It'd be a very strong claim to say that is not going to happen ever, because you do not know the set of all future possibilities of anything. And so it's all about solving the problem and then working backwards and then seeing the architecture that fixes that best suits the solution. And so Magic Block released this. So they call them ephemeral rollups. And based on what I understand, there's something like a state channel. And they also share state with the base layer on Solana. And so you can kind of mirror it and then maybe use durable nonces to settle back on chain. And they've modded the validator to do that. And I know one of the guys actually who's working on it, he's super, super smart. I think he was on core Node.js or JavaScript and like literally helped build Node. And so it is a serious team. And so I'm super excited to see what they do with that. That seems very cool. And then you'll get the skeptics saying, well, why is this necessary? Why not do it on X? Why not do it this way? Why did you do this? Why are you trying? Just give up. And that kind of goes back to my previous point, which is like, in a space where we already do not have applications, why are you trying to discourage people from enabling app development? Right? It's just, I do not understand this kind of nihilism. But in any case, I think one thing we can say with some certainty is that these AAA games that people have funded for years, who have taken in a lot of cash, just have not produced anything useful so far. That is not to say they never will, but they haven't. And so I think what could be much more interesting personally are just the smaller kind of phone games, right? Maybe like a Clash or some sort of Candy Crush, or even just horse racing on your phone, just when you want to just shoot the shit, play with your friends, put a little money on the line or something. And maybe it's one of these games where it's actually just like Clash, where the ownership of your assets matters, and you can maybe do some interesting things with that. And then, of course, you start running into the App Store problems, which is kind of what Solana Mobile is there to maybe help shift a little bit. But so that's, to anybody listening this, just basically what I would say is just do not listen to anybody. Just do what you want to do and build things instead of listening to any sort of skepticism by anybody who does not and has not built stuff.
Bullish tinkering. I feel like we're just I've kind of had this epiphany that everybody trading meme coins all day has just like, you lose money, you win money, you lose money, you win money. And now everyone's just pissed off because if you log out of Twitter for 3 days and then you come back in and you're like, wow, like, why is everyone so angry? This is sentiment. It shouldn't be any different than it was 2 weeks ago. But here we are. And so, I don't know. I feel like the meme coin nihilism is showing itself in multiple ways. And one of them is just like everybody being generally more grumpy. It's odd. I don't know. But this shit is really cool. We need to get them on because this seems like it can be applied outside of just gaming. Gaming seems like one context, but it seems really cool because it retains interoperability or composability with the base layer by, it's basically like right locking a certain account and then doing whatever you want within this validator, which I don't fully understand how that works. And like, this is a game, so trust assumptions don't totally matter, but like how that changes your trust assumptions, and then optimistically settling everything back down to the contract. So the example that I showed on the screen there was, there's a account that holds the position of your player within a game, right? So you can imagine like a RuneScape game, you step around and you're in a different square no matter where you step. There's like one account that holds his position. And so basically you would lock it, open up this ephemeral state channel type roll-up thing, which again, I really want to get more context on how this works. But then when you're playing the game and moving around, the node will like basically keep track of all this and then only settle when you close, presumably like a log out of the game, which is really cool. And I'm intrigued to see how this kind of develops and impacts the roll-up space. I mean, if you look at Ethereum right now, everybody's trying to figure out how to build the best roll-up. We're seeing different iterations like base roll-ups. We're seeing optimistic versus ZK, where optimistic roll-ups are finally getting their fraud proofs and they're permissionless in this nature, and they're figuring out the different economics there and how that should work. Mm-hmm. Everyone just wants to build the best roll-up. And if this is sort of like a roll-up, which I don't even know if that's a fair way to contextualize these, to be honest. Again, I really don't know enough about these. I just caught my eye and I'm super intrigued. Then that'll be interesting as well. Again, because but I don't think it would really work because you're only changing the state of like one specific account. So I don't think you could have like a DEX in one of these ephemeral state channels.
Yeah, maybe. I'm not sure either. I haven't looked too much into it. The one thing I would say is ultimately the infrastructure nuances don't matter for game developers. What needs to happen is the app development cycle needs to be abstracted and frictionless as possible. And then the infra people can kind of fiddle on the infra stuff, of course. And that's kind of one of the things on CT, which is that does dominate the discourse, because the people who actually would build the apps or maybe use them generally are just totally out of the conversation. And so we're kind of speaking to nothing. And so focus is super important. And I just think I am starting to see that a bit better, or I'm seeing it improve, and we just need to keep doing it.
There's a great talk by Josh Bowen from Research Day, and he talks about we're all building the same thing. And I would encourage, we'll put that link in the show notes of that. I would encourage everybody to take a listen to that, because my takeaway from it was everybody's building roughly the same thing, and there's going to be a big box somewhere in that. And how you decentralize that big box is going to matter a lot. And it kind of like walks through the approaches of this for some of the larger ecosystems today.
Yeah, John actually has a post coming up for this, and it should be live by the time he releases this episode. And it's like a 57-page report on it. And it's about Josh's maybe thoughts, contrast, Monad, Solana, based rollups, pre-comps, all the stuff to say, okay, we are building the same thing. But obviously there's some trade-offs, and maybe some of that is timing games and weird edge cases like that. But yeah, I would encourage people to read that once that comes out, which should be by the time this airs.
My friends, big news. Blockworks is hosting Permissionless 3 in Salt Lake City this year, so we're heading west for 3 days starting October 9th. Permissionless is our industry's premier DeFi event that brings together crypto natives from all over the globe. I've personally been the last 2 years and can honestly say that the attendees are incredible. It's people who actually care about crypto. We'll also have more than 200 industry titans speaking at the event, and this includes builders like Lucas Bruder from Jito Labs and Brian Pellegrino from Layer Zero, or investors like Kyle Samani and Joe McCann, and even elected officials like Representative Tom Emmer, who's fighting the good fight in Washington. And it's narrative season, so we're going to be covering the 7 hottest themes in crypto. This includes things like modularity and restaking, or Bitcoin and L2s, and even AI and crypto. The goal is to keep you up to speed on major developments in the industry. Ticket prices will be structurally increasing over time, so get your ticket today. For my Lightspeed family, I got you. We're going to use code Lightspeed10 in all caps, no space, for 10% off your ticket. All right, everyone. I look forward to seeing you at Permissionless 3, and let's get back to the show. The notion of big boxes and small boxes, the overclock team, and I think a couple other people are building something really cool, and it's called Mithril. Can you give us the high level on what exactly Mithril is and why it's cool?
Basically, it's not a validator client. Let me get that out of the way. From what I understand, I could be wrong, but it's basically a full node client designed for verifying blocks. So maybe take a step back. People probably don't quite understand the nuances of the moving parts here, but there are a few types of nodes on Solana. There's ones that participate in consensus and vote on forks, so like voting on what they think is the right state of things on the chain. And these are people who you stake with, right? When you stake with a validator, the more stake they have, the more blocks they produce, but also they have to vote on what's happening. And so they participate in consensus of the network. And the validator requirements for that generally tend to be high, particularly bandwidth and internet, because you need to be able to, it's a global network and blocks are being streamed from all over the world all the time. And you need to keep up, process, do X, do Y, etc. And so that's kind of how the validator works. Now, there are also full nodes on Solana that are not in consensus. And these are actually RPC nodes. And basically what they do is they have a full state of the chain at all times. And the only difference is they do not vote. The only thing they do is they serve that state to people who request it. So apps, data providers, whatever. So if you want to read the chain, you do not call the validator, you call the RPC, which is not in consensus. This is, by the way, it doesn't have to be this way. You can combine them if you want, but that's a lot of work to do for one machine. And so we just separate them out. So modularity, okay? And that's kind of the high level. But again, there's a lot of things there that the node needs to do to be able to fulfill those obligations. And so I believe, and I could be wrong on this, is the Mithril team basically has a stripped down version of this, where they strip out anything that's not necessary for verifying the blocks. Like, okay, this block, was confirmed. Here's what happened. I can, as a user, if I want the least possible trust assumptions, I don't want to trust anybody. I just want to run this in my own house and see what's happened on the network without trusting an RPC or whatnot. I can now do this at the end stage of this. And that's a good thing to have in case of basically catastrophe, right? It's a good security property to maintain that people. Now, I don't think it's the most important one, by the way. I think there's many different things that go into decentralization and security and safety. This is kind of the one little piece of it that is actually quite important. And so once users are able to do this, then it helps kind of boost that. If you imagine some virtual dashboard with all these different parameters, this kind of helps increase the verifiability of the network for users. And so it's super useful in that context.
Right. I think that's the big takeaway here is it right now I think you can in definition of the term in the US, probably you can run an at-home consensus node, but it's not meant to be run that way. And you're probably going to end up like one of the potatoes on the network, as they call them, versus if you look at Ethereum, you can run your own full node. You can confirm, you can see what blocks are, you can verify what blocks have been created and what the chain tip is and things of this nature. And you can't really do that at home for Solana. So it feels like a pretty big stepwise function for at-home verification, which is exciting to see. It's always been a knock on Solana. It's like, I can't do this myself, or I can't even send a transaction to the chain without Mert's help at Helios, right? That's a huge step to be able to you can send I don't think you could send super complex transactions, but you can definitely send moving your soul around. I think they're bringing in a pretty basic wallet implementation as well, which is cool to see. And so it is exciting from my point of view. I think you can even, one of the things that they're stripping down the node, to your point, and then just keeping the bare minimum requirements. I think I saw it was 32 gigs of RAM, which is it's a nice laptop, but that's nothing out of this world by any means, which is cool to see. Because you don't have to participate in consensus, there shouldn't be any crazy internet requirements either, as far as I'm aware. So it does improve the decentralization factor for Solana. of course, like I think another important metric there is decentralizing like the global distribution of data centers for consensus nodes, and I that's just like a timing game in terms of that's a gradual expansion as more and more people are interested in participating in consensus. And so I think Tiny Dancer is doing this as well. I think that's through the Jump team as well. I don't know the timeline on Tiny Dancer at all, if it's anytime soon.
It's not. Tiny Answer is not affiliated with Jump.
Okay.
They are, I believe they're a hackathon project from a few hackathons ago who've been kind of doing this on the side. I'm not too sure what the status of that is. But I would say Mithril is going to be much more important from my estimation.
Nice. Okay, cool. I had no idea. That's good to see as well. And then one of the cool things that you can do with Mithril, or that will be able to do with Mithril that you can't do with a full consensus node right now, is replay blocks from any point in history, which I don't think you could ever replay and catch up to history, given Solana is moving so fast at the tip. But it is cool. You can be like, hey, like if you're like a custody protocol or something, or a custody for clients, you could like prove that transactions happened in the past with this node, which is cool.
Yeah, I mean, yeah. So you can replay blocks currently, obviously, because some of us need to do it, but it does require a relatively sophisticated way of bulk processing data, and it's not super accessible.
Anything else we got to hit on today, Mert? I know I saw the ZK Sync airdrop seemed pretty solid, but I still saw like ZK scam floating around the timeline. Kobe put out a tweet, something to the effect of like, people just keep bitching about the airdrops. Like, is it even positive EV for these, these larger teams like ZK Sync, for example, to even be doing airdrops? I'm curious if you have any thoughts on what we'll see in the future for these larger protocols that, like, maybe they already have a following or maybe they don't. And, airdrop has kind of been a marketing tool, but I'm curious if you have any thoughts on how the future of airdrops will shake out.
I haven't kept up with the ZK Sync stuff. I kind of just tune out all airdrop news and noise at this point because I personally don't believe in the meta and what it's used for. It seems to be a product tailored for farmers, basically, is how I would describe it. Now, again, I don't have the knowledge that other people might have on this, but I personally hate the idea of using it as a marketing tool. I don't think that's what marketing is at all. I did post something small on crypto people in particular getting this super wrong, which is conflating attention and advertising with marketing. And while the former two are subsets of marketing, they're not marketing. Marketing is much broader. Marketing is literally the founder telling the story of the company, why people need it, why they're different, why you, in a noisy, crowded field of other incumbents, it is the products you build and the products you don't build. It's the people you hire. It's how those people themselves talk. It's everything. And it's your go-to-market, it's your pace, it's your philosophy, right? For example, Solana doesn't necessarily do marketing, but totally tweets all the time about his values. That is marketing. And arguably the best kind, because you can see how many people have gravitated to Solana strictly because of Tolly, or have gained respect for Solana strictly because of Tolly. That's marketing. Tolly did not do an airdrop for this. And he certainly didn't engagement farm. So, well, actually, nowadays he might be trolling a little bit, but
I was going to say, hold on, time out. We had a great monologue going there.
And so, airdrops, I think fundamentally the way I think about it is it's useful for rewarding people who were early for the risks they took. And that works particularly well if you don't tell them there's an airdrop coming and telegraph absolutely everything about it, is the way I think about it. People in crypto have this monkey see, monkey do thing where it's like, oh, these people did points, I'm going to do points, I'm also going to get success, whatever. And again, this actually goes back to the very, very first point I made, which is that doing the same thing is not actually doing the same thing because so many different things have changed, right? It's like a stream of water. The stream of water is never the same. There's always something new about that stream of water. And so I don't know this meta. I mean, I'm not good at airdrops, whatever. I don't farm these things. But what I can tell you is using them purely for marketing is not smart. And the other thing I would say is more tailored towards the overall cynicism is the reason they're cynical is because, again, the product was tailored for the farmers. And so if the farmers don't get what they want, they're going to complain. That is the dynamics that you've set out playing out. There's nothing new there. And you then combine this with the prices and the red candles and the tribalism and all this, and then you now have this field of bullshit and noise and cynicism and all this stuff. And partly because it's easy to do, right? I can, if I'm angry, I can just say you're doing it wrong. That's it. Obviously, super easy to do. What's much harder is like, okay, I believe in, let's say, this mission of crypto, and I'm going to be here for some time. I'm going to keep building, and I'm going to be optimistic, and I'm going to listen to the feedback, of course. I'm not going to just say it's irrelevant because it's coming from shitty people or something. All feedback is great. But what you can't do, or what I don't like personally, at least, is just the cynicism. It's like, if you're a cynic, sure, whatever. Be cynical all you want. But realize that, I don't want to get too philosophical here, but in 20 years, after you've been this cynic for this long, what have you done? Right? What have you done? Have you saved the world or something? Like, you've just lashed out your anger at something that you probably could have helped with instead of just putting it down. And now you're worse off for it, right? That's kind of how I think about it. So basically, the theme of this episode particularly seems to be, if you're building something in crypto, even if you're not building something in crypto, if you're just analyzing or researching or trying to write, contribute in whatever way, recruit, host events, all this stuff, just understand that some people just are not wired to add value or even want to add value. And you need to do it in spite of that.
That was beautiful. Clip that. You can't say you don't want to get too philosophical when you're using metaphors about streams of water, though. I gotta give you that one. That was beautiful. But I mean, that goes back to what I said earlier, right? People are just upset. People are grumpy now. I don't know why. Like, I'm blaming meme coins for that. I don't really have a good thesis as to why that's the case, but that's what everyone's doing, and everyone's pissed off. So I'm using the causation there, or the correlation there, to be my causation. But yeah, I mean, I agree. Like, you mentioned that it's bullshit, like airdrop farming. And if you've paid any attention to Layer Zero founder Brian Pellegrino's recent tweets, Layer Zero is probably the most Cybeld protocol in the history of protocols in this space. And he's going through, like, one by one and doing these these Cybeld reports, and it is insane what he's found. Right, there are like full blown legitimized operations that are farming the shit out of these protocols. And yeah, so I agree with your points there that I don't know how this ends, but it's ridiculous the way it is right now.
And they're spending a lot of resources, either outsourcing it to some companies with a lot of money, or they're doing it in-house. Either way, they're spending an insane amount of resources just to get that sorted out. And they could have spent that time improving the product, which I'm sure they're still doing, but now you have less resources to do it.
Right. And I mean, again, if you just scroll through his tweets, like, this dude is spending a lot of his time doing it, and like, it's important to him and he wants to get it right, and that's fine. But I agree with your points, Mert, that like, build your product. I mean, I agree. And so I do think it will see a shift away from these super large airdrops, but like, it just gets harder to launch a token, right? If you don't do an airdrop, like, how do you get that first swath of tokens liquid? It's very hard to do. And then you get yelled at for having a low float token. It feels like there's always something to yell at people about. So we'll end it on a happy note. And yeah, I would just say, get out there and try things and be optimistic. Skeptical optimist is probably the best way to figure out how anything in this industry works. Be like, hey, that's probably not true, but I'm going to give it a try, and you'll learn things. And that's really where I would leave it.
Also.
But awesome, Mert. It's always a pleasure, man. These roundups are a blast. And to the audience, we will see you next week.